And we are live. All right. How's it going?
I am so ready to chat and get into a lot of things that happened this week. This morning I've been pretty frazzled, just concerned about the state of the country yet again.
I totally hear you. So we're waiting for some people to come in, and then I want to make sure we get you introduced. And I want people to know who you are. Also, tell me your exact YouTube address how people can find it.
That is a tricky one. I started my YouTube channel a long time ago, so can I write it in the chat?
Yeah, write it in the chat, and then I'll go ahead and. Hello, Adrian. Okay, so write it in the chat, and then I'll put it on a banner so everybody can see it real big.
Awesome. So Nyozi Music was initially like my little cover channel that I started maybe almost 10 years ago now. So yeah, that's the handle. But I am Kimi Katiti, and I post a range of content from painting to skateboarding to music-related stuff. Most recently, more opinion videos because I couldn't quite control myself. I just had to speak out about some of the things I noticed that were awkward with this nation and with our dialogue about race. So yeah.
And you do have to give us your meatloaf recipe.
Oh,
you're gonna have to do that. If not today, at some point, because that's now like 2 videos. You're like, oh, it's my meatloaf. I gotta go. So I'm like, this girl likes her meatloaf, so I need to know. I love meatloaf, so I need to know this recipe. Okay, so people are starting to come in. So yeah, this is Kimi. I wanna tell you guys how I met her, because this will tell you a little bit about me too, because I'm kind of in your face. Poor thing. So I saw her video that said why I hate CRT. So I'm like, I got to hear this. And it came up in my YouTube suggestions, by the way. So go YouTube. I'm actually surprised. And so I watched it, and I was like, this girl has it going on. First of all, you just had some of the things you said about it resonated with me. I agreed with, but also your perspective was a little different than what I had heard before. And so I love that. And then what I did was I reached out to her and I said, I love what you had to say, and I would love to bring you on my channel and actually talk to you more, because, people need to hear from you. And I think your channel is criminally undersubscribed. No, seriously, people need to go. I mean, also you can, if you like to skateboard, you're going to see content there too. So right. Anyway, all right. So tell me what concerns you. You're concerned about the state of the nation.
That's a huge one. The first thing I noticed is coming from South Africa. I'm actually Ugandan. So my parents are Ugandan, that's my ethnicity. My mom is more so Rwandan, and I would love to talk a bit about that and how that relates to like the 1994 genocide. But my background and my education in South Africa prepared me mentally for my approach to race. That was that we want to progressively judge people by the content of their character and not like by the color of their skin. Like that was the whole idea of anti-racism that I had within me. So when I came to the States, there wasn't really a lot of talk about racism. Like everything was pretty calm, but few years into college, it was a lot of amplification of like the race, white versus black kind of tension, and intersectionality became a big thing, and the introduction of like bell hooks and people of that nature. So I was just like, okay, cool. They're teaching me about the world. This is how the world works. I guess I didn't know that much about race. So I began to adopt this critical thinking. In the wrong sense, not the right critical thinking, like the wrong critical theory thinking. And I would go into spaces angry. I would go into spaces expecting a negative response just because I was like a Black female. And I realized more and more whenever I took this approach of like entering ready to battle because there's nothing that's going to separate me from my Black feminism or whatever people perceive me as, I tended to have a bad experience if I went in ready for that. Whereas where I would go into situations thinking whatever. I'm not really conscious about like who I am at this time. I just want to enjoy people and enjoy people's company. That painted a different experience in its entirety. So I started to think, and this was mainly through skateboarding and going into kind of bringing like Black or queer or like different multi-ethnic skaters who weren't the traditional like cis white male into skateboarding spaces. I just began to notice that the critical theory approach wasn't true in reality. It just didn't translate to reality because you're negotiating with individuals. You're asking people, can I skate here? Is it okay? You're interacting based on an individual to individual basis. And the majority of people have a good, like they're good. The majority of people present themselves to be good people. No one's out there trying to kill you because you're Black. No one's trying to stop you from skating because you're Black. You tend to have a few bad apples who just because of the way they are, maybe they were brought up wrong or they had something bad happen to them in childhood, that they have a very retaliatory or a revengeful attitude. But that doesn't necessarily correlate to like race and sex in like the broad brushstroke sense. So a lot of the people that I would hang out with, that I would skate with, we all had a sort of like groupthink mentality that was more in alignment with intersectionality. But I was like, I'm starting to see this thing completely different. And then all of a sudden, when in 2020, when George Floyd happened, I noticed like all of these little seeds of critical race theory, they began to like bloom fully. And it was like, we really saw what people had brewing within them. There was a lot of anger that never met a resolve. We would talk about reconciliation, but no one wanted to talk about forgiveness. I remember going into a meeting with my church group, and they were like, they separated us Black and white. And I thought it was
church.
In a church setting. This was a church organized talk about reconciliation. They were like, white people, go to breakout room A, Black people go to breakout room B. Wow. So I'm in the Black room, and I'm like, guys, we need to talk about forgiveness. In 1994, there was a Rwandan genocide because they heightened the difference between two tribal groups, so much so that the one group went out and murdered the other group with machetes and knives. Like, this happened in 1994. We need to approach this whole situation with forgiveness. And I said that in the Black Zoom and got completely shut down. People were like, I can't forgive. And keep in mind, this is a church. We talk about forgiveness every time. And they're like, we can't forgive. There's nowhere we're forgiving. And so I started to notice that there was forgiveness did not apply to race. Like, it just stopped there. There was like a cap. So
even the people sitting in the other room,
right,
were not worthy of their forgiveness purely because of their skin color.
Exactly. I was like, there's something going on with this ideology that even church people kind of can't see the hypocrisy there in like a very obvious sense. So I was like, this is bigger than just me saying, oh, we need to forgive. This is bigger than that. There's something that's just like a broad ideology that's skewing people's perceptions and taking people away the true goal of like anti-racism, which I believe is just like not judging people by their skin color, and just going off into a whole other thing. I was like, this has to be stopped.
Well, the thing also that I'm hearing here is that people who were, this happened in Minneapolis, so like a couple thousand miles away. Do you hear an echo?
I don't know.
I'm hearing an echo. I don't know where it's coming from. Okay.
Oh dear.
So this is very odd. You don't hear it?
Could that be me by any chance?
I don't know. Do you have sound on somewhere to playing?
No, I don't.
Do you guys hear an echo? Does the audience hear an echo, or is it just me? You do. I have an echo. Okay, hang on one second. Let me see. It's still there. That is very strange. Okay, there's nothing playing here. Can you still hear it? Because now I don't hear it anymore. You still hear it? Okay, now I think it's gone. I don't hear it anymore. Can you hear me? Kimmy?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. That was very odd. All right. So what I'm also hearing is that something that happened a couple thousand miles away to another person with no actual evidence that it was perpetrated. I mean, he was murdered. We see that, okay? But that it was done because of race. Like, in other words, we see the demographic makeup of the people involved, but that in itself, there's nothing visible that like, oh, he did it because he was Black. It was just that's how it happened. But it's like these people in the church group internalized that event and are now personalizing a trauma that happened to someone else as being about them in some way.
Yeah.
So even without specific, like, it would be a little easier to understand still, by the way, not actually their experience, but it would be a little easier to understand if there was overt evidence that he did it strictly because George Floyd was Black. But there wasn't any. And then when you add to that the fact that they're believing that this is about them, like they're saying, I can't forgive. So for me, it makes me wonder, what can't you forgive? That George Floyd was murdered? Because that's an individual who perpetrated an act of murder. And
Right.
as we saw, he was, I mean, obviously they didn't know it then, but the justice, that should have been the primary concern. The one I had was he needs to be tried for a crime and brought to justice. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I wanted him to have his day in court like every other American. But that's so strange to me. Why do you think, I know that Ada was talking about this a little bit yesterday too, but why do you think people are taking on other events and other people's experiences, even from hundreds of years ago, and making it personal?
Well, my honest personal opinion is we're dealing with a lot of we're getting our identity from media. A lot of them, like today, consumerist culture is very much so linked to this is who you are. This is how this product is going to fulfill a puzzle that you're missing in your life.
Right.
So we form a lot of our identity based on media representation, music, movies, that like hero's journey. We resonate with that because we kind of don't have a way to find out who we are without that. I feel this is just my opinion in Western society. So a lot of people look like a lot of Black individuals will look at movies and representations of themselves in media and identify with that. And so when you have yet another identifier or another person who shares something in common with you, like George Floyd, it's like, oh, this could be me. We kind of like put ourselves in that position and say like, okay, this could be me because I've watched this movie and I've heard this song and it doesn't really relate to like, this is my individual experience versus them. It's like, I get my identity from the media. So this is yet another puzzle to fill that hole.
Right.
So I honestly think that's the issue, is that we just kind of conflate so many of these like archetypes from like media into our own lives.
It's interesting though that they would choose the negative archetypes.
Right.
And I say that because, we had 8 years of a Black president.
Mm-hmm.
That could be you.
Yeah.
We have had, we have an entertainment industry right now, especially in music, that has very high representation. Yeah. We have increasingly artists, CEOs, I mean, people coming to the fore, the sort of upside or the good part of focusing a little bit on diversity and of experience and trying to showcase different faces and different people has been, I think you see it a lot more. I mean, to give a very basic example, you walk into Target as an example, and in the last 10 years, the faces, the mannequin, the things that show you who society is made up of, if you will, has gotten way more diverse in every respect, both in terms of race and size and shape and everything. And there've been some good developments in that respect, that it's like more reflecting actual reality of like who lives here, right?
Absolutely.
So given that, I'm always perplexed by why, when you have both positive and negative potential that could be me stories, is it just repetition? Is it just the sheer number of the negative stories, do you think, overpowering the positive messages?
Yeah.
Or is it intentional? I mean, we don't know, but like, what's your guess?
I mean, given the fact that you have a whole I believe like there's a whole other chapter of like Black achievers who've done amazing things. I think there is just an intentional effort to emphasize degeneracy. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you why, but I just think that there's no reason why we should be as Black people constantly presented with images of failure, of criminality, of just like I don't know, promiscuity. I just feel as though, especially in America, this is not necessarily true everywhere, but in America, those images are represented. And I think, again, going back to like the, Joseph Campbell Hero's Journey story, it has to do with fulfilling an archetype, and Black people kind of are made to fulfill a certain character in society, which is, I think, is absolutely wrong. And so now you have Black people taking on the identity of, oh, I must, because of my Blackness, what Blackness means is that I'm more like these negative stereotypes. And so I'm more of a target when I'm faced with the police, which I think is a very negative, like you're identifying with negativity, with criminality.
Well, because
don't
at the same
understand that.
time, there's a component, it feels like to me, and I think John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry talked about it the other day, the bad ass mofo.
Yes,
Did you
I
see
saw
that
that.
one?
I
Okay.
did.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
I want
yeah.
to say that, I wanted this to be shareable for people. So,
Right.
but they talked about it. And so it's like this tension between, there's a negative archetype, but at the same time, I don't want to disassociate from that because then I'm being inauthentic. I'm abandoning
Exactly.
my
Yes.
roots or something. And
Yeah.
I'm being disloyal, or it feels very tribal. It doesn't feel individualistic to me.
Yes.
Because you're you, right?
Right.
You don't belong to the collective, so you can be whoever you choose. That's the beauty of life, especially in America, is like you can be whoever you want to be. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot change, there are mutable characteristics, can't change my skin color, things I can't do. But in terms of my character, in terms of what values I want to hold, that's my choice.
Right.
So I mean, part of me, the compassion in me says that must be very difficult.
Yeah.
Like that must be a very difficult struggle for
Yeah.
someone to go through, where you have to make a decision to do things that are life affirming and positive and going to help you grow and develop as a human.
Yeah.
Or have the feeling, or be told explicitly, like Tim Scott was, you're a traitor, you're a bad person, you're with the enemy, this kind of stuff. The tension must be strong.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to, want to build your life in a positive manner and then get called, white, or like you're trying to please white people. I struggle with that. I came here when I was 19. I came to the United States when I was 19. And my focus has always sort of been like education, go to college, like after college, get a job. And so in order to achieve those things, there are a lot of things that I couldn't participate in that would be considered like, that would fall into this is what you do when you're Black. So I don't really buy a lot of fancy clothes. I go to Goodwill, go to thrift stores. I'm fiscally like conservative in that sense. But then it's like, then you kind of get alienated because your aspiration towards sort of building your life and seeking the good gets associated with trying to be white, which is something I never really understood coming to the United States. It's like, no, that's not necessarily the case in Africa. People don't see pursuing good things for your life, pursuing liberty, pursuing a family. They don't see that as white. It's just sort of scaled on a level of progression, not necessarily on a racial level of whiteness.
Right.
So yeah, that's been a very, very hard tension. But I've just come to the point where I kind of don't care. Like I'm like, okay, cool, call me the names, because I'm the one who's enjoying what I have like earned so far. So I don't really mind it at all.
Yeah, it just seems such a shame. Focusing on education like I do, I can't help but feel like the antidote, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but I feel like education is an antidote or can be an antidote
Yeah.
to what goes on. Because when you take a child and you have them in an environment for so many hours a day, you have a golden opportunity to expose them to ideas and to information they might not get any other way. They certainly won't get in mass media. They won't get in the news or even from social media. And I feel like we're going the opposite direction. Instead of contrasting with that, and instead of presenting them with success stories of Black excellence and achievement, and not just even specifically Black excellence, but to like disputing the concept of race. And it is a concept, it's a construct, it's nothing real. And so instead of disputing that, we're calling attention to it and reaffirming it. Paul Rossi, the school teacher, and I'm going to beat this drum, by the way, you guys, anybody listening, I'm going to repeat this statement as many times as it takes till it sticks. The other day, he was on a podcast. He was a teacher in New York who called out the anti-racist program, critical race theory, at his school to defend his students. And he was on this podcast and he said, racism is real, but race is a lie.
Yeah.
And why would we teach our children a lie just because some people believe it? And that really it hit me. I just sat with that and I went, that's everything. That statement is everything. It ought to be like on a t-shirt, on a bumper sticker, on it. It's
That's so good.
Because it's true. You're not going, racism is a character flaw. It is something, it's evil. It lives just like good and evil live in the heart of all of us, right? It's part of the human condition. And our goal as humans is supposed to be to reject it and shun it and push it aside and move forward and be good humans. And so you're never going to eradicate it unless you literally removed humans. I mean, the potential is always there. So why would you call attention to it and teach children that something it is based on? So in other words, a bunch of people somewhere believe this lie that there are these walled groups of people called races when we're really just the human race, right? That the walls are in melanin content or shape of your eyes or texture of your hair or color of your eyes. Are these ridiculous, immutable? What are you gonna do? Pantone strips to be like, you're the, it's completely ridiculous when you actually take it apart. And then we're going to turn around and teach it to our children in school that it's not just, we're going to eradicate the lie by teaching the lie. That just makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it's I don't even know where to begin with it. I can only, like, my brain just immediately goes to like conspiracy land, because I'm like, who came up with this and who's enforcing this? And how is no one able to see that the goal ultimately isn't to judge ourselves by these physical, traits? Like, we're literally telling kids, like, okay, because of what you look like, your human experience and ultimately your humanity is going to be completely different.
Exactly.
And literally just setting people up for some sort of, I don't know, disadvantage, some sort of setback. My mind just goes conspiratorial world, and I'm just like, yeah, I don't know that this is, I don't think this is an accident. I don't necessarily think that these are, I don't want to say idiots, but I don't think whoever came up with this is an idiot. I do think that there is kind of an intentional effort to keep Black people infantilized in a way, sort of create a hierarchy of superiority in a way, and sort of maintain whoever is white, whoever is, at the top. Because I don't see how in the Martin Luther King Jr. way, I don't see how that would succeed. If we actually believed what he believed, we'd have an equal society eventually. But if we take on this critical theory, then we're actually preparing ourselves for survival of the fittest. Like, people who are not prepared, people who are not educated, people who are not facing intellectual rigor, like, they're always going to fall to the bottom, because we live in a natural world with, physical laws, and that's never going to change. So if we're not willing to confront those challenges, willing to let like other obstacles in our way make us stronger, then we're always going to end up on the bottom, whoever that we is. So yeah.
That's so this is the podcast, by the way, We the Fifth. This is the podcast.
Gotcha.
So if you're interested in it, it's really good. And the people involved are Michael Moynihan, who's a Vice News national correspondent, Matt Welch from Reason Magazine, and Kameli Foster from Freethink. So if people are interested, that's who that is. It's so interesting you said about like conspiracy and whatever. And you know, it's interesting. A lot of people say, "Oh, conspiracy theories." Like, yeah, but here's the thing about conspiracies: they happen. There have been some pretty famous ones that we know about, right? So it's not like it's this far fetched concept. A friend of mine who's actually from South Africa, he's a linguistics professor in teaching in Korea. He says CRT is white supremacy repackaged and marketed to the Black population in order to impede their socioeconomic and educational progress.
Wow, that's exactly it.
That's what he said. He said that he goes, "That is what I believe," and then he kind of like take it and use it.
That is what I believe as well. As that summed up everything I feel very brilliantly. What was that person's name again?
His name, I'm going to put his name also up here, you guys. He wrote this book, by the way, The Babylon Cipher.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. And so I'm going to put his name. I'm going to be reading the book, and there's a chapter in it specifically about propaganda. So I'm pretty excited for it. But his name is right here. And I always pronounce it wrong. He says it's okay if I do. But, and I'm going to see. There we go. Okay. Banner. Here is his name. Alaric Narde, I think is how you say it, but I always get it wrong.
Gotcha.
Anyway,
awesome.
But yeah, he's brilliant. And he wrote this book. And like I said, I actually started the chapter today, and some of it I have to read a couple times because it has things about language that are a little technical, but this specific chapter, language engineering and propaganda, and this is actually a picture of Joseph Goebbels. I mean, he said it might freak me out, the chapter, because the Nazis were they were intentional. Everything they did with semantics was intentional. And when I think of critical race theory, I do, like I said, race is a lie. I would actually call it the big lie.
Yeah.
And so this is what Hitler specifically said. He said, all this was inspired by the principle, which is quite true in itself, that in the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. And thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie. So all you have to do is keep repeating over and over again, systemic racism, systemic racism, systemic racism, systemic racism. And even though you get 10 people in a room, you'll get 10 different definitions of what systemic racism is. And even when you begin to dismantle each definition and get it down to where, they don't really hold water, they don't hold up to scrutiny in 2021 America, or they point right back at the speaker.
Yeah.
So if it's a representative from public education defending DEI in the classroom and CRT in the classroom, and you say, this sounds an awful lot like you're turning the public school system into a racist institution.
Yeah.
Okay. Then it's like, block, shut up, you're a bad person, all these things. So it either turns on itself or it just gets torn down, and it doesn't matter. People get to the point where they've attached their identity to this big lie, and now you're an existential threat to their person, their personhood, by challenging it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I don't even know where to begin. And the whole education thing, like you said, I believe we spoke about this this past week, but in South Africa, and this is going back to the whole like conspiracy effort, but there is the actual conspiracy, which is not even a conspiracy. It's just a fact of history that the Africana regime in the 1940s, 60s, they introduced something called the Bantu Education Act that was specifically intended to give Black people in South Africa a lower education in order to have them suited for menial tasks once they, graduated high school, whatever form of education. And Bantu education was literally what we're seeing kind of happen with public schools in America, where we're lowering, the standard, the high school entrance test, right? Or at least there's an effort to, in order to kind of level the playing field. But in South Africa, that already happened. It might have been a bit different in a sense that it was only specific to Black people, but they just lowered the education entirely. Mathematics was taken. Math wasn't even math. They literally told Black people that 0 minus 1 is 0. Like any other number that goes behind 0 does not exist. Like there's no such thing as -1, -2. It was like 2 plus 2 and onward. Like don't think that deep. Like don't teach yourself about what's actually happening in the physical world. And that was a literal conspiracy. They conspired to stunt the education of Black individuals in South Africa. And luckily, unfortunately, a lot of people did not vote against that act. They did not stand up against it. People just kind of let it happen because they felt powerless. But here we have a chance to stand up again, like before this thing goes out of hand in like the country that is currently standing at number one. You don't want to let it happen here, because that's going to give permission to other countries to sort of do that thing.
If they aren't already doing it.
Yeah, exactly. If they aren't
their own minority populations or whatever. Right. And it's funny that you say that. So that was in what year they did that with the Bantu education?
Let me look it up really quickly. But it had to be like in the mid 20th century.
Okay, so it's in the 20th century, right?
Right.
Interesting. Because I'm going to read something to y'all, and some of it, people who are loyal watchers of my channel are going to recognize this, or maybe not. Again, it's another one I want to repeat over and over. Mm-hmm. We want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity in every society, to forgo the privileges of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific manual tasks.
Right.
That was Woodrow Wilson, the president of Princeton University at the time, in 1909, speaking to the New York City School Teachers Association.
Wow.
Chills, right? I mean,
yeah.
Part of what I keep trying to educate people about on this channel is the history of public education in America. Is when they speak of systemic racism, I'm like, I got some bad news. I'm sorry, but I have a little bit of bad news for you. Right. The system itself, you're talking about the Constitution and this. No, the Constitution was the thing that helped us desegregate the schools finally, right? That was a step in the right direction. But if you're going to talk about things that foundationally were systemically racist and xenophobic, mm-hmm. the public school system.
Yeah.
And we have not changed the structure, governance, hierarchy, org chart, et cetera, of this system in about 100 years. We haven't changed.
Crazy.
We haven't changed it. It's still the sort of almost like industrial revolution shape and size of the built to have, rows and this and that. And they keep tinkering around the edges with things, mm-hmm. but their tinkering takes on more of a like, let's take the latest newfangled discovery and shove it in the schools, not let's take a giant step back and look at whether this entire system even makes sense anymore.
Yeah.
Let's build something new, but we can't because the incentives for the adults who work in it, and also because it's government run and there's a lot of politics there, the incentives are in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm so cynical when people tell me that school is the right place to dismantle racism. I'm like, mm-hmm. no, honey, I don't think so.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting when you bring up apartheid South Africa.
Yeah.
People are saying almost identical things to what Woodrow Wilson said.
Exactly. And just so that if anyone's curious, it was 1953, later named the Black Education Act. So that actually happened. Like, it's not crazy to think that the same effort could be trying to be replicated, 70 years later?
But people will say, Kimmy, they'll say, but that doesn't make sense. But why? But they say that they want to help. They say that they're trying to, make things better. They're trying to end racism. They're trying to dismantle whiteness. They're trying to do all these things. And see, then the cynic in me says, yeah, because they learned that the people who did that and were overt about it, they were like honest about it, they lost political power.
Right. Exactly.
Because they were like, hi, I'm actually racist and we're going to do this thing. Right. Exactly. It didn't really last a whole lot longer. So, but if we take, as my friend said, if we repackage it and redecorate it and dress it up, it's the identical ideas. It's these sort of, lowering of expectations, eliminating of standards, these kinds of things. And if instead we say we're being helpful and this is all to be helpful, here it comes again with the echo.
Oh no.
It's there again. What is happening? But if we repackage it, that maybe, people are buying it and they're saying, but they say they want to help. And so my question on the channel always is, well, is it? How's that working for you? How's it working out? Because I'm seeing literacy rates for everyone go like this. Not just Black children. I'm seeing numeracy. It's there again. Okay, I guess I'm the only one who hears it. I'm seeing numeracy decline. I'm seeing the achievement gap. The achievement gap itself is closing up, but not for the reasons people think. It's not that Black students are doing so much better. It's that all the other students are doing a little worse. So they're kind of coming down to meet them. And also, they're changing the standards. So you've got like two things operating at the same time. It's hard to tell what's really working. You can't change so many variables. I mean, anybody who does any kind of science understands this. You have to keep something constant. You can't go, well, let's change the grades and change the measuring standards. And while we're doing that, let's also, we'll also fail to teach reading properly. And then we're also going to say, hey, look, here's, no. Right. You don't get anything reliable out of that. And now they want to do away with the tests altogether. And people say, yes, well, those tests are racist. I'm like, so can you explain how you're going to find the achievement gap without a test?
Right.
You're just going to magically divine that
I think a fundamental problem with this whole thing is sort of it's a very philosophical issue, I feel, where there are people who think that you can shift what it means to be human. Like you can just sort of make people, mold them into what you want them to become, or they'll just sort of like, they'll follow suit, like humans and humanity will change, or you believe that humans are humans are humans are humans. And that in this physical world, like we have to, I don't want to say adapt, but we do have to face like physical reality. And what I mean by that is if you burnt everything, like you destroyed the earth and we had to start from zero, nothing's going to change the fact that we still need to start a fire. We need to get a camp going. We want to harness electricity. We want to build buildings and we want to have shelter. We want to defend ourselves from other predators. Nothing's changing the physical reality of this existence. So when you're stripping away and, taking away the power from people from education, which education is really learning how we operate within this physical reality, you're basically making way for a group who is hoarding all the resources, all the knowledge, all the books, everything. They're automatically always going to have the advantage in the case that this all burns down, because they'll be the ones who know how to start the fire. They'll be the ones who know how to set up the tent. It doesn't, just because you're leveling the playing field, it doesn't eliminate the fact that we have to live in this physical world and survive. So I don't understand why we are allowing, I guess it's fear. I think some people and a lot of well-meaning people are scared to say we need to deal with whatever is happening with the literacy rates in like Black communities, because that sounds harsh. Like that sounds like you're insinuating that there is a sort of inherent deficiency. But if you really believe we're all human, then you're not scared to approach that, that topic, because you know that, yeah, I want to encourage people to love education, to love reading, because I see it in them. Like you tell people to do push-ups because you believe they can get stronger. You're not telling them to do push-ups because you want to hurt them. Whereas when you're like wrapping something up in bubble wrap, it's because you think they're fragile. You actually think like, whatever it is, it's gonna break. And that's where I believe real racism exists, is like, you don't want to tackle the real hardships or like the real disparages. Like, you just want to wrap everything up in bubble wrap. But that doesn't change the fact that like we live on Earth in this physical reality with like these physical laws that we can't change.
Exactly.
You know?
And we're not doing these kids any favors. I also think it's incredibly demeaning to approach problems with the assumption that mention of the problem is personal. First of all, when no, not necessarily. Do you think it's personal? You know, it's like when people say that to me, I'm like, do you think it's personal? Do you think they can't read because they've done something wrong?
That's the thing. Yeah, right.
No. So my calling out the fact that there's high illiteracy rates or high illegitimacy rates is not me saying what bad people you are. It's just me saying this is a statistical fact.
Yeah.
And maybe before we can solve a problem, we need to know the size and shape of the problem, and we need to quantify it, and we need to accept that it is the first step to recovery of any situation. You talk about addiction, or you talk about any problem that you're having in life, is to acknowledge its existence. You can't deny it. You're just, you know, I mean, the irony is you'll hear that exact phrase from Ibram X. Kendi. He'll say, you know, denial is the heartbeat of racism. And it's like, no, it isn't actually. It's belief in fantasy concepts like race is the heartbeat of racism. It's not denial. So, but I'll tell you what is the heartbeat of illiteracy is denial, like denying that it's there, is that actually is true, because they're two completely different things. One's a concept and one is a measurable outcome.
Right.
And we've got them backwards.
Yeah.
You can't measure a construct. You can't measure the size and shape and quantity of an idea that's lodged in someone's brain. You can't even prove it's there. Unless they act upon it. And now there's something measurable. Now it's like, oh, you did XYZ on such and such a day, and I have it on video, and like, okay, now I can measure it. But you can't tell someone, least of all, based on how they look. Yeah. And yet we're doing exactly that. And I see so many people, well-meaning people, and you know they're well-meaning, because if they weren't, they would be speaking up faster, sooner, and more harshly, right?
Yeah.
I think the only reason these ideas have gained any traction in America is that we are an anti-racist nation already. And when I say anti-racist nation, I mean that culturally, systemically, legally, in every way, we are currently organized around the proposition that all men and women and so forth are created equal.
Exactly.
And they have equal rights under the law. Whether or not that is adequately realized and, you know, in effect in every single, you know, little interaction is a separate issue. But as a nation, if we're talking in general, that is literally what we are.
Yeah.
It is not acceptable in 98% of society in America to walk around and be racist and say racist things and have racist attitudes. I'm not hiring somebody because of this. It's just not even, it's not only not acceptable socially, it's not legal. And so that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means that we aren't a nation that encourages it, that welcomes it, that upholds it, all of what we're accused of doing. And so I think because of that very fact, when people say we need to do more, most people are like, okay, let's do more.
Yeah.
Is there more to do? Like, is there something I can constructively do? Most people will jump on that bandwagon. And when I saw what happened to George Floyd, I was like, police reform. What can I do to help with that process? Like, that's a thing. That's a thing that can happen, right? I didn't think defund the police. I was like, wait, whoa, what? But that doesn't mean I don't think there should be reform. It's just like we're taking like a giant sledgehammer to kill what systemically is a mosquito. And I don't say that to belittle the individual instances. If it happened to you, it's terrible. But in the grand scheme, it's a mosquito.
That's well said. A very like worldview shifting quote from Nelson Mandela that helped me understand, like, you know, especially from his life, he's experienced like the full spectrum of like freedom fighting and being like a civil rights activist and president and so on and so forth. He said, he came to the conclusion where he realized that the oppressor defines the nature of the struggle. And like at the time that he came up with that quote, the conditions that kind of formed that whole like mindset was that he was trying to peacefully protest um, with his friends, his colleagues, the ANC, what was like the forming group of the African National Congress. They were trying to peacefully protest, but they were being met with just severe opposition. We're talking like all the forces. Like if this was war, like the peaceful protests weren't working for an apartheid regime that was extremely restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
And so he, for that time, believed that then the nature of the struggle would have to be combat, not necessarily combat, but just being a bit more thoughtful about the protests, using strikes instead of protests, just kind of being smart about the avenue that you're taking in relation to the amount of oppression you're experiencing.
Right.
But once that was overturned, and when he was in prison, there were a lot of sanctions from like the US, like people were stopping their, as apartheid became, this whole like, oh, we got to stop that in South Africa, then the nature of the struggle had to change, because now you're not dealing with force as much as you're dealing with like ideological battleground now.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mandela's approach switched to more of a forgiveness and humanity, like understanding the humanity within the Afrikaners, because we're going to have to live with them once this is all over. The end is in sight. So we're like, okay, we're going to have to like live side by side. And so he became more of a, let me understand them now, because they're letting their weapons down. They're putting the guns on the floor, and they're like, we don't want to have anything to do with this apartheid regime anymore. So like you couldn't, like you said, you can't bring a sledgehammer once people are at that point, because they're at that point. They're transforming. They're saying that we're backing away, like other countries are not willing to cooperate with us. Like we want to do what we need. We want to do what we can to move forward.
In other words, it worked. It's like the efforts.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like what Martin Luther King did worked brilliantly. Exactly. It worked so well. And so it just feels like, especially now, so many years later, I said, I was born 2 years after that act passed. I've never known life in America that wasn't integrated and, all of that. So it's bizarre to me. Growing up when I did and everything, what I've been hearing in the last 10 years, like, is there some place in America? I've traveled all over the country. I've lived in about 7 or 8 major urban areas in America for at least a year or longer. I've moved a lot, but I just think, what did I miss? Was I living under a rock? And I kept thinking, is it me? Like, is it because I grew up sort of privileged? But wait a minute. No, I went to public school for a long time. Wait, and then I was living in New York City, and I couldn't understand what people were seeing that I wasn't seeing. And then I realized, no, it just isn't really there.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first time I saw real overt racism in my life was as an adult, and it was in Boston, of all places. It wasn't even in the South. Now I live in the South. And when I first came to the South, I was sort of expecting it. I was like, and it was the opposite. Actually, before that, I moved to Texas, and I lived in Texas. And I remember having a conversation with a bartender who was Black. And he said he moved from the North where he felt like it was too racist, and he moved to Texas.
Oh, wow.
And he said the same thing I had observed. He said, I feel like the South has gotten its butt kicked. It's like kind of, it's had its like reconciliation. It's kind of dealt with it. It's been chastised. It's been told. And now, that doesn't mean it's gone from every person. Doesn't mean every individual person has abandoned it. But as a region, people are like, yeah, we're over it. Thanks.
Yeah.
We're done. And whereas in Boston, there is still so much tribalism that goes on there to this day, even within groups of white people. It's insane. I mean, I was verbally attacked. I was threatened with physical assault.
Oh, wow.
Because I moved into a neighborhood where the properties were very inexpensive, because I could only afford that. And I wanted to buy a house and fix it up, not to sell it, to live in it. And we were not welcome. Everybody who lived there was white and Irish. They were all mostly of Irish descent. And it's a place I've made movies about. There's a movie called Townies, and they actually were so eager to get rid of us that a couple who lived down the street, who were actually a townie brother and sister that apparently were the same height as my ex-husband and I, they were walking home one night and they were jumped by a group of other people from a different section of town and had come over, like been hired to come over and beat us up.
Whoa.
It was a mistaken identity. They beat them nearly to death.
Whoa.
Yep. She permanently lost sight in one eye and the use of one leg. He had one of his arms broken in multiple places, etc. So I didn't even hear about it until I was noticing she wasn't around. And I saw her mom, who was always sitting on the stoop. I was walking my dog and I said, "Where's Sheila? I haven't seen Sheila in a long time." She said, "Oh, she's still in the hospital." I said, "What happened?" She told me. And then she told me the truth. She said, they were coming after you guys.
Wow.
They thought it was you and your husband, and they jumped them instead. And I said, "What's going to happen?" She said, "Well, my other son gets out of prison next week, so I'm pretty sure they're in hiding because they're a family. They were a family, but see, they liked us. They actually liked us. She worked in the prison system. She was a parole officer, and her eldest brother was doing time for accessory to murder. And so, this is the kind of neighborhood that it was, all white, 100% white. No black people lived in this neighborhood. And they made it abundantly clear. There were some Asian kids who would come and walk their dog because their parents owned the Chinese restaurant. They didn't live there. They'd just come over. And they're children of those people in Boston, Massachusetts. Okay. Such a left-leaning state. They were throwing rocks at those children. They were throwing rocks at the dog. And I interceded. That's kind of one of the reasons I got on their radar. I interceded and I yelled at them. I called the police. I said, go pick on someone your own size and, get out of here and stop it, because they were in their teens and the little kids were like 8.
Wow.
The police showed up, and this is after, when they came, the mom of one of the kids I was yelling at came barreling out of her house at me with her nephew armed with a hockey stick. And he says, "You want me to beat her? You want me to beat her?" And I'm just like, whoa. I was also, by the way, 6 months pregnant at the time, visibly pregnant. And the kid is asking his aunt if they want me to be beaten. This is 2002. So we're not talking like 100 years ago. And the police showed up, and I told them everything that happened and what I had done, and that this woman and her nephew were threatening me, whatever. He pulls me to the side and he says, "You really ought to know better." I said, I'm sorry, what? Like, does not compute.
What?
He said, "You people are the newcomers here. You don't belong. And you need to understand the dynamics of this neighborhood. And I'll have a chat with them about throwing rocks, but you need to stay out of this business. You need to get, stay out of it." And basically told me that I needed to just watch my back. And this is the police.
What in the world? What was all that about?
It was insane. A newspaper article came out in the local little paper about this and some other incidents that happened with us and the kids in the park. They put in brand new streetlights. They broke them all so they could continue to go out and vandalize people's homes and stuff. And they blamed us. They interviewed people who lived around the perimeter of the park, and they said, "Well, these people, they come in, they gentrify the neighborhood. They don't belong here. We've been living here for decades. They don't belong here. They're outsiders. They think they can just come in here and buy these properties." And we're just young families, We put our house on the market and moved like 2 months later.
Wow.
Because I was like, I'm done. I stand my ground up until somebody threatens my life and I'm pregnant and I'm not bringing a child into this situation. But that was in the North. That's in Massachusetts. So, that was really overt, not just racism, but bigotry and about the whole "you don't belong." So I can only imagine what is going to come of this kind of teaching kids that they should identify with their skin color and identify with their ethnicity and identify. These people already do. And that's what that looks like.
Exactly.
That's what that translates to.
It sounds a lot like pre-genocide Rwanda as well.
Yeah.
That's kind of that was the precursor, was this, like, you couldn't separate the traits from like the idea that these people are, bad or like they're evil just in their person. And we're not teaching people, like, we're not showing them examples like that and saying, like, this is what happens when you emphasize that.
Nope.
I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry to hear about
Well, I
that.
mean, I throw that out as an example because um I have seen what tribalism does like right here in America in a little microcosm of a neighborhood. And with the fact that we are encouraging that, and as you said, no, they don't know about, excuse me, they don't know about Rwanda.
Hmm.
I mean, it was on the news in the 90s. I remember it very well. Bill Clinton was president, et cetera. I mean, I remember it extremely well. I remember the UN. I remember all the things that went on, but I was an adult at the time. If you're a teenager right now, I can assure you they're not teaching that history.
Absolutely not.
They're not teaching history of Mao's revolution
Right. Oh, they're
or of Pol
definitely
Pot.
not. Yeah.
Everybody's heard of Hitler, although I will say my children, when they were in public middle school, were astonished to learn that their fellow students had never heard of the Holocaust.
Oh, wow.
Right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, they had never heard of the Holocaust. So my daughter was talking about how it was Holocaust Remembrance Day one time, and one of the kids in her class said, "What's that?" And she's like, what?" Like, what do you mean? What's that? Like, it was
Mm,
bizarre for her because, of course, we've seen Schindler's List in this household, and we've talked about all these things and just ourselves. And it didn't dawn on my daughter that everybody didn't know what it was. It was like,
right.
doesn't everybody know what the Holocaust is? No, no, they don't. They're not teaching it. They're not teaching it. And now when you go on Twitter, you'll see whole threads of people. Um, I've even seen, unfortunately, some of like BLM supporters saying things like, "Oh, well, the Jews will whine about the Holocaust."
Yeah,
And then
I
underneath the
heard
thread
of
will be
that
like,
too.
they'll say, "Well," and then they'll talk about slavery and they're like, "Yeah, but one of these things didn't happen."
Mm,
And that's not getting called out as a problem, and it's like
yeah.
that's a big problem. That's a big problem. You can't fight
Yeah,
bigotry and racism and things if you aren't going to talk about the truth.
exactly.
So,
I, yeah, education is being kind of equipped or armed to become a propaganda machine. It's like we're hiding certain stories, we're hiding certain histories, only bringing up the ones and sort of blowing up the ones that we want to use. We is them, not we. But like
what
that.
when you were in school in Uganda, did they teach you about the Atlantic slave trade? What did they teach you about it, and what did they teach you about American slavery? Like, you obviously weren't afraid to come to America, right? I mean, you came here. Were you terrified that they were going to be hunting you in the streets, or what were you told?
Not at all. Well, I think media would have something to do with that, like movies, TV series. They kind of will paint that liberal or like neoliberal picture for you. Because we all watch like Hollywood movies, like in Africa, in other parts of the world too. So you kind of have that at the back of your mind, but then you're also like, I don't really care. Like that, those are the movies. Like, let's see what it's really like in real life. And we learned mostly about the let me get the right term, but it was more so of the Indian Ocean slave trade from East Africa because I was studying in Uganda and in Tanzania. So the emphasis was more local, like the history that we learned was very local, like Bantu groups and how they migrated to like the South and South Africa. Colonialism was a huge thing that we learned about when it came to history. Different wars that happened, wars within like on East African turf, and struggle. There's so much history to do just with like that one area that comprised a lot of our education on history. But of course, we learned about the Holocaust. We learned European history as well. American history, not that much. We didn't really learn about American history because I don't know. It felt really far from reality. Like America isn't really a land that really exists. Um, there's this one bodybuilder who used to train with Arnold, and he was like, they would say go to California as an insult because it's just so far away. It's like it's not even that you couldn't comprehend that to be like a real destination. He was an Italian guy.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, America is just so far off that we didn't learn a lot about American history, but mostly European and African and kind of Asian uh, history in that geographical area, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, were there bad guys like when you were growing
Yeah.
up? As far as what you were taught in school, who the historical baddies were? Who were they to you?
Well, growing up, it was. not even, it's very hard to paint it as bad because they weren't really giving you a narrative take on it. They were like, this is what happened.
Oh, that's
So
nice. That's
they're just like,
refreshing.
it wasn't
This
really like
happened. Form your own conclusion.
exactly.
That's nice. Yeah, I like that.
I mean, you do hear kind of like you'll get like the end result of what happened, and then you make your own, conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So we learn about a lot of the colonialists, like Tanzania was colonized by the Germans. This is what the Germans brought. This is what they did. These are the wars. Rwanda by the Belgians. You learn about what happened there. You learn about Uganda colonized
They were
by the
pretty
British.
brutal. The
Yeah,
Belgians were pretty brutal. And,
they were
Americans
horrible.
don't learn that. There was like,
Right.
Americans are the worst. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Like,
I
I'm not
don't
saying we're
know.
awesome, but I got to tell you something. The Belgians. Oh, boy.
Exactly. It was there's a lot of there's just so much history that I think
The French
ultimately,
weren't all that awesome either in Africa.
yeah, not at all.
So,
French, yeah, we learned all about the different groups of colonialists as well as like the tribes and the tribal wars and what happened all the way down to South Africa and the
right.
British Boer War and that sort of thing. Like that comprised a lot of our education. But we were never taught like white people are bad. I think that's a fundamental thing, is that we kind of had a picture of colonialists who sought to divide and conquer were bad. But it wasn't that modern day whites are, bad. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's like, I'm listening to this and going, that would be fantastic.
Right.
There's even there's an emphasis now in talking about colonizers or people who colonize the New World or whatever on this side of the ocean. And I'm not opposed to teaching students that was a mixed bag. That there are people who did terrible things
Yeah.
to the natives. But it's like we've gone all the way to say not only was every single thing they did, horrendous to the point where if we could go back and hit pause and erase, we would erase it all.
Mm-hmm.
But because that's the implication that nothing, we should just continue to beat ourselves up about it. But also
Mm-hmm.
the present day people who live here are usurpers. So now we have land acknowledgements and all kinds of things, forgetting, of course, the fact that the concept of property ownership in and of itself is it's a Western concept. You have to have a legal system in order for there to exist something called property, because without a legal system, a system of justice, you can't defend property without violence. Then the impression is given that people never did defend their territory with violence before colonists came here. And that's not true. Tribes were constantly fighting over land. It's not this like everyone was nobly preserving the earth and then the white people descended and turned it evil. It doesn't work like that. That's way too simplistic, almost cartoon-like.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you learned a much more rational, factual story, which I'm not opposed to. I don't know anyone who is, to be honest. I don't know anyone who says Christopher Columbus was an awesome guy and we should teach him like he was like perfect hero with a halo. Like, I don't know anybody who wants that.
Yeah, me neither. I give a lot of props to my educators growing up, because they were just like, this is just what I have to, this is my job, is to tell you what happened. They weren't invested in painting the villains and the heroes. They just wanted to present that story. I think this is just my opinion, but I think a level of trusting students to make up their own minds is needed. That we can comprehend. That's the whole point of learning, is that we can see that, an excessive amount of death is usually a sign of something that's not working or it's not good. But yeah, they really just taught it as it was. Another thing that was, new to me, that wasn't really represented in the media was, the East Africa slave trade to like the Arab nation, or like, what would formerly have been from like thousands of years ago.
What? You mean Americans didn't invent slavery?
Exactly. That's the thing. Is like I mentioned this a lot, and people are like, "Oh, so slavery actually happened?" Like, what?
Slavery is older than language.
Right.
People don't know that. Like, you tell the average person that, like, what? Like, yeah. Before we have actual recorded language, we have drawings and stuff of slavery. So, like, we know that slavery has been part of the human condition. Every culture, including native tribes in the Americas, had slavery. Some had human sacrifice even.
Yeah.
And, you know, there are people who came to this country who were white, who were fleeing slavery.
Yeah.
Some of them were brought here as children as slaves before the Atlantic slave trade ever began, before a single Portuguese ship ever left. So but nobody talks about it. Nobody teaches the actual history. There's like a narrative of.
Yeah. I'm just like, what's to be gained? That's all I think is like, what are you gaining from like omitting certain, parts of history and over exaggerating other parts? That's where my land is sort of my mind drifts off into conspiracy land. But
what do you think? What do you think people gain? What do you think people gain from? Look at this, sweetheart. She gave us a little super sticker.
Oh, thank you, Alexandra.
She's awesome. So, thank you. So we, what was I going to say? So what do you think? I mean, like, not so much what do you think why they're doing it, but what are the upsides? Who benefits? Let's like back up from like who benefits from maintaining a narrative that it's a white supremacist culture, that we that Black people are oppressed, all Black people are oppressed, that the Black experience in America is informed by slavery, whether you or somebody descended from slaves, brought here as slaves. I mean, who benefits?
Going back to like my middle school education, you think of you take it down to a micro scale and you look at what like the Belgians did to the Rwandese. They took these two tribes, the Hutu and the Tutsi, with like very, very indistinguishable traits, like physical traits, nose size, eye size, height, and they emphasize those differences to them. And they're like, this group is going to have an ID card and they're going to have ID cards to get into certain places. And we're going to give more advantages to the other group, sort of like, you've heard the story before where you like emphasize races and you separate the people.
Like the experiment, the brown eyes, blue eyes experiment that was done in a classroom.
That one. And I take that and I think that the whole point of this emphasis on division is so that people who have power maintain the power. It's not even a race thing. It's just people who want to control, I would say even the world at large. They need the people to be divided so that there's a constant focus on an enemy that isn't those above, I think that's the whole point of it, is if we're concerned with, we have to change everything here because of whiteness, and it's not necessarily we have to change everything here because a small group of people have the concentration of power, we'll always be focused on the wrong thing. And not, recognize our common humanity, because when we do, we're automatically like the majority that could easily strip away the power from the very small minority. And I also think there's also an effort for sort of Marxist communist type thinking. That's another thing that I think about a lot is there was an intentional effort in 1925 to use Black African Americans as sort of the channel to bring in a communist takeover into the United States. So when I see things like the Black Fist being conflated with communism, being conflated with Black, and trying to make the two things one, that, Black people automatically agree and are just naturally communists, I'm like, no one ever said that. No one agreed to this. I didn't agree to this. So when I see those things, I'm just like, I definitely, it brings me back to the Belgian colonists, and it brings me back to just communism in general, and the initial motives of like Comintern back in the 20s.
It makes me really sad because if I look at before this last election, just statistically, I don't really want to talk about like the politics of it, but statistically, if these statistics are to be trusted, the unemployment rate amongst Black Americans was the lowest it had ever been.
Yeah.
In the entire history of the country. And of course, that's been completely undone now because of the pandemic and lockdowns and things of that nature. But I feel like this particular movement, this anti-racist movement, this push towards equity or equal outcomes, I truly believe in my heart of hearts that it is going to set people back. It set everyone back, first of all. But I think if you were already starting, and objectively, statistically speaking, by the numbers, the Black African American population of, and I'm talking not the ones who are immigrants like yourself, but those who are native, we're already starting by and large socioeconomically below other immigrant populations, other minority populations. And I just feel like it's like kicking them down.
Yeah.
I feel like they're being used as sort of the easiest population to start the divide process. I don't think it will end with that. I don't think that's because that's why they keep adding in like, and Hispanic and they keep flip-flopping on Asian, like, oh, Asian hate, thing. Oh no, Asians are bad. Oh, Asian, if you're successful in Asian, you're white. If you're not, then you're in the club. They're adding, LGBTQ plus population. They're sort of adding more and more identities so that when they have completely wrung out as far as they can go with the black versus white argument, they have more layers that they can focus on to keep the focus off of, and just to kind of keep us divided 10 different ways. It's not that the intersectionality is, when they bring in intersectionality, it's not so that people will unite. It's the opposite. It's like, these are all the different ways you're different and need to be divided. I feel like it's really insidious. It's actually pretty scary to me.
Yeah. I also, just knowing that we've had this, like literally Nazism was not that long ago. I mean, I'm watching Downton Abbey and like, there are a lot of things that are still like, oh, this was only just then, but that's in the 20s. Like it was 20 years and then we had, Second World War. So I don't believe that I don't believe that we've seen the end of real racists who are like, we want to create the supreme, race. We want to sort of phase out other races. I still think there are people who are like that and who have a degree of power that literally want to suppress education amongst Blacks. Thank you for sharing. When we spoke last, you shared about Frederick Douglass and how, and I got like one of his, I believe it's a book about his life, but I did see the quote that, you want to hide reading, at least these like racist people want to hide reading and education from Blacks because they think like, oh, Blacks are going to be successful. Like
he said, reading makes a man unfit to be a slave. Is what was said to him. That one of the best biographies is written by a man named Timothy Sandifer. I don't know if that's the book you got. It's a thin book. I'll look it up and put it in the thing. But Frederick Douglass is a hero of mine, has always been. And I don't understand why we don't teach him in school. I feel like he should be taught at the same time as Abraham Lincoln. And the reason I say that is not just because he's Black or because he escaped slavery and all these things, but because I believe that he had the same appreciation for our founding documents. And he's been misquoted and in my opinion, misrepresented. Some of the people currently, are we there? Okay. He's been misrepresented even by Nicole Hannah-Jones and others from 1619 Project, because at one time in his life, he was very antagonistic towards the founding documents. Like, oh, all men are created equal, are they? Right? When he was just beginning to become aware of everything. And of course, he wrote a lot and he spoke a lot. So that was documented. But he interacted with somebody else, and I can't remember who, it's in this biography, who kind of helped him understand that all the potential to overturn all of that, all of the potential, that these were aspirational, right? And that in fact, the documents are beautiful. Don't malign the documents because the people didn't live up to the documents. And Martin Luther King echoed that later when he said, it's not the documents, it's our failure to live up to them, to those ideas, right? It's human beings. It's kind of like saying the Bible is flawed because people aren't Jesus.
Right.
It's like,
Exactly.
it's like, that's not how we evaluate a text. So we look at, when you look at him, he came to the realization that like everything I need to know about me as a human and me being free and my rights is here. And just because you all aren't willing to do the same thing, just because you don't do the same, that doesn't mean it's not in there. And and just like Lincoln, he said, this is what this country's potential is. You're either gonna keep it or you're not gonna keep it. You're either going to move forward or you're not. And various great thinkers, I mean, I could do an entire class for kids just on the different people in our history who have echoed that same sentiment of this is what liberty is. This is where it ties back to the documents, and it's up to you. It's up to each generation. You're either going to keep it or you're going to lose it. These are the behaviors and the ideas that will help you keep it. These are the behaviors and ideas that will throw it away.
Yeah.
And he would be one of the people I would teach if I were teaching that class.
Absolutely.
Because he to use a Martian term, he grokked it. he got it. That was all up in his consciousness. He got it so well.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to get the name of that book, but go ahead. What were you saying about other thing?
No, I guess my thought was kind of along the lines of don't exclude the possibility of Nazi level. What would the word be? I don't know if it's eugenics.
No, they were. I mean, I guess that's kind of. They weren't.
Right.
Weren't eugenicists standpoint of like, oh, this is to make, like this is good, kind of like how Margaret Sanger was.
Right. I believe that I think that's actually what I'm trying to anchor it to, is more of the Margaret Sanger intent to literally phase out a race that you deem inferior or that doesn't have a chance at like actually living a full life, which is what you see with like the Bantu Education Act and what the quotes from Woodrow Wilson and all these sorts of ideas ultimately that try to separate and weaken certain groups in order to eventually like phase them out. Like I always keep that at the back of my mind, that it has happened before, that, we haven't like, there's a possibility it might surge in like a different form, in a repackaged form. So yeah, I just like to keep an open mind and consider that there could be people in power who that is their intention. When you see things like this that don't make sense, when you see like cases of police brutality like presented in a very skewed way, you start to wonder like, why are you doing this? Like,
well, if you think about it, if you're offering, remember, like politicians don't produce anything, they don't make anything. So they have a platform. They have something they offer to people to say, hey, elect me and I will fill in the blank. Okay. So when you look at conservatism, okay, let's, for lack of a better term, or if you prefer, for some people prefer classical liberalism. Okay. You are looking at people who say, if you elect me, I will do my level best to protect your rights. And what that means to me is that I have a wall of limiting principle that says any policy that comes across my desk that in any way infringes on your rights, including your property rights, by the way, okay, including you get to keep what you lawfully earned. But, anything that crosses my desk that's going to infringe on any of these rights that were listed in the Bill of Rights that I put my hand on the Bible and swore and I'd uphold this, I'm simply going to say no. Like, I'm just going to vote no. There's not a compromise because it infringes on rights. We're done here. So my job is like guardian of the galaxy, like when it comes to like your Bill of Rights. And if the people proposing these policies, or I'll never propose a policy that does either, but if the people proposing the policies can come up with a way to solve a problem that is like within our purview and that like doesn't violate your rights and can somehow be done best by government, then, I'll consider it. I'll definitely consider it. It still doesn't mean I'm going to do it. Just because it doesn't violate your rights doesn't mean it's a good solution, right? But at least that's my limiting principle. I'm not even going to touch it if it does that. So that's kind of how I think of like conservatives, classical liberals, just I'm here to preserve rights. That's the role of government, protect the rights of the people. We're the last line of defense against tyranny and against the mob, right? Then what I see in the sort of progressive side is government is here to make stuff better. Government is here to make life better. If there's a problem in life and you think you don't like the way things are going, whatever, then we're here to like do things. We're here to do stuff to make things better. Now, there are things that have happened in the past. Like, people say, well, they fought for women to get the vote. Women didn't have their full rights, and it was mostly progressives that fought for that. Okay, well, there you go. Then there might be things like, desegregation, because of course we were still segregated. But ironically, it was the Democrat Party. So, but anyway, so they were. So the point is, we're going to be doing things. We're going to be doing things. We're going to be doing things, but eventually you run out of things to offer. Like eventually, when you get to a point in society where people are pretty well off, prosperity is humming along, the engine of prosperity is working, and the markets where things are going, and you got to win elections. You got to, if your whole shtick is I will do stuff, you have to find things to do. Well, to find things to do, you need to have problems. There have to be problems. Things can't be going okay. So if you can't, if everybody were successful, or the majority of people were successful, and those who weren't were supported privately, then why would you need to vote for that person? You wouldn't need to, they wouldn't have a job. Like, what are they going to do? So you have to be, you're almost like, I'm a solution in search of a problem. And then if you can't find them, you got to make them. Yeah. And there's an allegation. I don't know if it's true, like true in the sense of if I were there, I could have videotaped it. But it's been said often enough by people who are somewhat credible that when the Civil Rights Act was passed, and of course that was in the both private and public sectors, you had to serve people, right? That Johnson wanted to move forward with this Great Society program and welfare and all these other things, and explicitly said that he was going to have, I'm not going to use the word that he allegedly used, those voting for his party for 100 years. That like as a career politician, that he felt it was his job to come up with a way to have the people who are now newly freed, we're free now. It's like, we're free to go participate fully. That I was like, what are we going to do to get them back to where now we can politically capitalize on them still. And that these policies were put in place with the thought that people who are dependent on government are easier to control. So it's like one of those theories. I can't prove it. But when I look at the state of the state right now, I just have to wonder, like, who wins, who benefits when people are angry, bitter, resentful, demanding things, trying to vote money out of other people's pockets, asking for every need they have in life to be paid for by other people, saying it's their due. This only career politicians benefit.
That's so true. That's definitely a new way for me to begin to think about a lot of things, and a new lens from which to see that. So yeah.
I mean, like I said, I certainly don't have all the answers. I don't know if it's actually true, but it's one of those things that whether it was intentional or not, it sort of is true in effect. Like that if you look at who's benefiting and getting some traction out of some of these ideas, it's people who want to do things like spend a lot of money, print a lot of money, all the things that are not necessarily healthy for a free society, like a truly free society, but they certainly do bode well for a big centralized state.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If that's your goal.
Exactly. Wow.
So I don't know, but so talk to us a little bit about skateboarding. I want to go lighter here because it's a weekend and we got pretty heavy. Did you start skateboarding in the United States after you came here?
I actually did not. I started skateboarding when I was in Tanzania. We had play stuff. I grew up with 3 other siblings, all older than me, and I wanted to find myself like they were all growing up and becoming teenagers, and I was still like this young kid. So we had a family skateboard, and I would just like get on it and go outside and just like start skating. I also loved watching, what was this? X Games. I loved watching the X Games. It'll come on like once a year, and It just was so fascinating. I just loved the visual aesthetics of skateboarding, the way people just looked so free and were doing
Right.
beautiful things in the air. So I would just like skate by myself on my own time and used the internet. We back then we would like go to internet cafes or book out a computer for a little bit of time, and I would surf and learn how to do different tricks. And this was from about ages 9 through to 12 when I was in Tanzania, and then put it down when I was in high school. I didn't want to be the awkward one person that skated, so I left that alone. But when I came to the United States, and I saw this is like 2019. So I'd been here for about 6 years. I saw girls skating a lot, like getting into skateboarding, and that was like, oh, so maybe I might be welcome into this. And it was very, like, I will say, the fear of racism and sexism is definitely real. There are those bad actors who always do, you watch the movies, you hear the stories of like people getting beaten up, like your story. And so I was like, I don't really want to insert myself into a space where I'm kind of the only one and like the sore thumb in the room. So I put that off to the side. But when I saw people get back into skateboarding, girls, black, everyone, I was like, okay, let me pick up the board again. So 2019, I got a skateboard and just started going to girls' meetups here in LA. And I think that was beneficial to get people to shake off like the fear of I'm going to be harmed in this space, or like I'm going to be unable to defend myself because I'm like the only girl, and if something happens. But then I think there's also a point where it just became very much so like, you started painting a lot of skaters with a broad brushstroke of, oh, they're all cis white men, so they're all kind of have some sort of malintent towards you. So that's something I'm trying to work out of, that mindset,
Yeah.
because it just hasn't really been proven to be the case in reality.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my skateboarding experience so far.
I'm sort of envious because I mean I'm way too old to like do sports like that, and I have terrible joints and arthritis and all kinds of problems. But when I was a kid, I always wanted to skateboard. I had a skateboard and I was just so enamored of all of it. It just looked so freeing. But I didn't live anywhere near a skate park, and we had like the driveway. That was basically it. But when I watch people do tricks and do all this stuff, I just think they look so free. They look like they're flying. They look, it looks like it's just so much fun. And I think especially during this time with this last year, to the extent that you've been able to get out there, it must have felt really good to be just outside. And,
Yeah.
I know they tried to fill some of them in with sand for a while.
Yeah, they did. That
which
was
is,
really crazy.
yeah. But, when you were able to do it. So I know that the other thing you mentioned on the phone to me was you were talking about your childhood and losing power, like when you had electricity, and you said something to me that has stayed with me, and I wanted to mention it again. You said that you were just accustomed to it. You had candles, you had things, and so when the power would go out, you'd be like, all right, well, light the candles, whatever.
Yeah.
And you didn't have anything electronic you could do, so you would read books. You just read lots of books, and
Yes.
that's that sort of thing. And I think you said to me, was that a privilege or not a privilege? Like you were almost like thinking through it in your mind about something that people in today's world might see as being underprivileged or, like oppressed. And yet you were there wondering aloud of like, maybe I was better off because I had to read all these books.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how I understood it, unless I
Yeah.
understood it incorrectly.
That's
Okay.
exactly right. When I was growing up, we had a lot of power outages. We're still figuring that out. That still happens today in Uganda a lot. But when I was younger, it was so common that it was almost like every other day the power would go off. There was like load shedding. And we were just like, okay, we have our little stove. We're going to put the coal in and cook. It was just like a switch, like an instant switch. We didn't think about it. We weren't like, oh no, like what are we going to do? So we light the candles. and then you'd kind of try to occupy your time out of school with like, okay, I'm either gonna play out with the other kid, play outside with other kids, or I'm gonna like read or whatever. You just had to kind of fill the space. And I chose to just read the encyclopedia because it had pictures in it. It was like really entertaining to me. So I would read like all through. I remember M had Michelangelo, like uh, a couple other things, and it was just so like it was amazing. It was really cool during that time, and I would draw out of the encyclopedia. So I would draw the images that were in the encyclopedia copies, and to this day, I wonder if that was kind of an advantage because before even like getting to go to schools or like even higher education where you like have the art classes and stuff, I was drawing way before that. And drawing has kind of become one of my main things today. I have the paintings behind me, but also reading and learning about the world. So you can't really, if you take everyone's individual case, you can't really say that external factors are, are equivalent to someone's success, because to a degree it's also your perception and like your individual decision in that moment of what am I going to do, like what am I going to do with what's presented before me. So it's hard, I can't tell you if that was an advantage or a disadvantage. It's just one of those weird things.
It is an example of the importance of perspective.
Exactly.
And
I agree.
because you can take the identical scenario and put a different person in there or a different perspective, and a whole different outcome could happen. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a book about a little boy, and I don't know what country it takes place in, but he builds a windmill to create power for his village.
Wow.
And his perspective was, all right, I got a problem to solve, so I'm going to go figure it out and solve the problem.
Right.
And he brought power, and then became instrumental in helping to design the first like actual windmills for power.
Mm-hmm.
But you posted something on your YouTube yesterday that I found profound as well about forgiveness, and it goes to what you talked about in the beginning of this live stream with Nelson Mandela. And I responded to it, as you saw, because it hit me kind of right where I live, that it is really important to think about, what am I holding on to? And does it serve me?
Yeah.
Me as an individual, but also if I am concerned about other people like me. Like, let's say you feel a part of a community and you feel a sense, we were talking in the beginning about not wanting to be disloyal, not wanting to be inauthentic, not wanting to leave behind your culture, whatever. If you feel that way, then you almost have an obligation to ask yourself, is this serving me well? Is this serving us well? If you see yourself as part of an us, let's say, okay, so you've chosen that. I'm not assigning that to anybody. I don't, but I recognize there are people who do, and that's their free will. So if you do, then look around. Are these things you're holding on to?
Right.
That could have been me, or whatever feeling. How's that working? And I don't say that sarcastically. I'm asking sincerely, because I really think that the thoughts we have in our minds are very powerful in terms of determining what we're going to do next.
Exactly.
And I thought your video, and you guys, really, if you haven't subscribed to her channel, I'm going to put that up again in case you weren't here or you missed it the first time. Please do. Whoops, there it goes. Because I love that you make relatively short, I'm terribly long-winded, but you make these relatively short videos, and there's so much in there. Like, they leave me thinking, like I'm just sitting there thinking for a while afterwards. Like, I watched it and then I let it kind of sink in for a while, and I thought, I have to say something because this speaks to me on a personal level. My own experience that I told you with like my mom, and having to forgive that she left, and she terribly abusive while she was there too. And so for a long time I was angry, I was bitter, I was just like, what I didn't have. And I remember so well when I finally asked myself that question. Like, all right, so super. So you've arrived at 30 years of age, and you're a depressed person, and you look at every interaction and like this. How's that working for you? It's not working. It wasn't serving me well. It wasn't. And I just finally said, I'm hanging on to this, and it doesn't serve me. And what is the cost of letting go? Why am I not letting go? And and that's when it hit me that it was serving me in a different way.
Yeah.
We choose these things because we're maybe unconsciously taking something from it. And, so I realized like it wasn't serving me well. I wasn't growing and developing and becoming a better person, but it was serving as an excuse.
Right.
It was giving me a ready excuse of why, like, oh, I can't maintain relationships because this is why these problems that I have because my mother. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
you're 30 now. Maybe you need to like, own this. It was
Yeah.
hard, but as soon as I did it, it was like much harder in concept than in practice. Because as
Exactly.
soon as I actually did it, I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, nothing bad happened.
Right.
So I almost want to ask people, and I'm not the right person to ask, because again, people go, well, you're white. Pfft. But I do want to ask people like, okay, what would be the worst thing in the world about letting go of this? Just
Mhm.
making a conscious decision to say, you know what, I'm going to have a little ceremony of myself, whatever you want to do with it. I'm going to just sit here and I'm going to say goodbye
Mhm.
to my anger. I'm going to put it over here in a box
Mhm.
and say, goodbye. You have not served me well. I'm
Mhm.
no farther ahead in my personal life, in my growth, in my socioeconomic status, in my education, and what all the things that I would want for myself, no farther along than I was a year ago, the year before that, whatever. So that you are a piece of the pie that has not helped. Your piece of the puzzle has not helped. Goodbye. And then approach the next day clean and see what happens. Like, what's the
Yeah.
worst thing in the world about that? What are you really giving up?
Exactly. From the moment that it occurred to me, and let me be candid and very like share my experience about the whole George Floyd summer that happened in 2020. I was actually very distraught. I was looking at it through the lens of race and through the narrative of race. I was like, this is a racist incident. Like, how dare they? And I could not stop crying. Like, I was broken, shattered. I couldn't focus. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. And then I was just like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. So I was like, oh, the Bible says like we should forgive, even though you don't really understand why someone would do something so horrible. And I just went ahead and did it. Like you said, it like when you think about it, you're like, oh, that's hard. I could never do that. When you actually just practice it and say like, okay, I forgive you. Like I had to actually say like, I forgive you, Derek Chauvin, even though I don't know you. Like I forgive you. I cut that off. I forgive you, even if I don't know you, George Floyd, or that I didn't actually think you did anything wrong. I forgive you. And it went back, like I went back through all the interactions that I've had with people that I thought were racist. I was like, okay, person A, I forgive you for that incident, like vocalizing it so that I hear it myself. And
Yeah.
let me tell you the honest truth is like after that, I was just like, okay, now what? Like there was nothing left. I've forgiven everyone. I've let go of all the debts, and I stopped crying. Like I literally stopped crying. I couldn't see things the same way, and
Mm-hmm.
I live in a very I live in a neighborhood where I'm like one of the only black people, right? I live in a traditional like Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, an Armenian neighborhood, so everyone else doesn't look like me. But I would walk down the street and interpret certain interactions as, oh, they're looking at me funny because I'm black. But it's like once I forgave and I was like, okay, it's off my shoulders. Like if you had a bad lunch and that upset your stomach and you have like a grimace on your face, like that has nothing to do with me. But that doesn't stop me from like smiling and saying hi to you or like being friendly. But then I noticed like once I forgave, and had allowed forgiveness to touch on like a racial part of my life, I was like, wait, these people aren't looking at me funny because I'm black. It has nothing to do with me.
They
No
could be
one's
having a
looking at
bad
me.
day. They could be,
Exactly.
you
I was
know,
I was able to think about those things and be like, wait, that's not exactly how reality is. It's not just like this literal. It's not black and white. It's like,
right,
oh, they're probably talking about like a family issue that has nothing to do with me. And
right.
at the end of the day, these things shouldn't affect you
No.
on such a deep level.
And they're also, it's easy to get tunnel vision. It's very easy to get tunnel vision. Here's
Yeah.
Carl says, I grew up in an Irish town in Boston with my German name. I got my share of persecution, name calling, and physical abuse. It's not just about color. So
Mm-hmm.
some of the people who are holding on to, and it's being enforced, like or reinforced with the rhetoric, it's your color, it's because of your skin. They're disregarding the realities of many, many other people not
Exactly.
just in America, but all over the world, where it's like, I hate to break it to you, but evil resides in the hearts of men. I mean, like
Right.
there are good people, there are bad people, there are good behaviors, there are bad behaviors. So there are individuals who behave very badly, mistakenly thinking they're doing something good. And the tragedy of it is, I bet in Carl's case, that where he was, as I described before, the sort of Irish tribalism in Boston, the people there were brought up to think you're disloyal to your Irish heritage if you
Mm-hmm.
are not sticking up for, you're not, oh, that person's German or whatever. It's
Mm-hmm.
that sense that there are boundaries between you that are invisible, that are not real. That's why I said racism is real. He
Mm-hmm.
experienced it. It's a kind of bigotry, not specifically racially or whatever, if you think of race as color. But race is a lie. Racism is real. And
Mm-hmm.
then when you believe that lie, it results in things like what happened to him or what happened to me and the things of that, like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I feel like again, going back to perspective, and somebody in the chat asked me to retell my man with the jack story. I don't know if you heard it when I told it to Ada yesterday, but
Oh no, I
when
didn't.
because I had that chip on my shoulder
Right.
and I carried it through my teens and my young 20s and so forth, I approached lots of interactions with that negative, fearful attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad, to his credit, tried to get it out of me. He had to repeat over and over this story. And somebody
Mm-hmm.
asked me to retell the story, but it really helped. It stuck with me. And then I've told it to my children too. It's called The Man with the Jack story. Man is driving in a deserted, like farm road out in the rural area. He's on his way back from maybe a business trip. And it's late at night and he gets a flat tire. And he goes to the trunk. The jack is not there. He cannot jack up the car. He can't fix the tire. But he sees in the distance a farmhouse. So he decides, well, I'll walk to the farmhouse and I'll ask for help. But all of a sudden it occurs to him, it's like 1:00 in the morning or something. And as he's walking, he starts thinking, there's nobody here. It's cold. I really got to get help. I got to get my car jacked up and get home. I don't want to go back to the car. And he says, but that guy's not want to help me. It's so late. What if he doesn't help me? Then I'm not going to get home and I might freeze to death. I'll have to sleep in my car. And he's all these thoughts going through his mind of all the terrible things that are going to happen when this person in the house doesn't help him because fill in the blank. He creates a
Mm-hmm.
whole alternate reality. By the
Mm-hmm.
time he gets to the door, at this, half-mile walk or whatever, he's pounding on the door at 1:00 in the morning. And the man comes blurry-eyed to the door and he's like, hello. And he says, take your stupid jack and shove it.
Oh.
And the poor man's like, huh? And my dad said to me all the time, he says, don't be the man with the jack.
Yeah.
Don't bang on the door. Don't assume the worst. Don't predict what other people are going to do.
Yeah.
Don't borrow trouble, first of all, because you have no control over what that farmer is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You have no control over it. So you have two choices. Do what he did, which obviously, even if the guy was inclined to help, he's not helping you now. You
Right.
just told him to shove it.
Right.
Or you can choose to assume the best, assume he's going to help you, go in with a good attitude, and then it's 100% on him if he doesn't.
Exactly.
You can't
Yeah.
turn around and even think the next day or the day after that, like, oh, if only I'd been nice.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
we've got a media, we've got teachers, we've got all kinds of people saying specifically right now to Black young people, impressionable young people, starting now at like 6 years old,
Mm-hmm.
they don't like you. They're hunting you. They want to hurt you. If you get stopped by police, which by the way is going to happen just because of your skin color, not because of anything you did or any behaviors you engaged, but it's just going to happen. They're going to kill you. This could be you. This could be you. Now they're all the man with the jack. They see the police and it's like,
yeah.
It's like this. Instead of thinking like, why would that be me? That's what Ada said.
Yeah.
She said, wait a second. Could that be me? Why would it be me?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't make sense. And it doesn't serve them well. Just like my dad said, it doesn't serve you well. Don't be that person. Change your perspective.
Yeah. I love that story. I definitely would love to like pass that, story on to like my future children, because it's funny how these stories that you hear when you're younger, they play such a pivotal role later on. Like the fact that the emperor has no clothes was one of the main things that really just kind of gave me like, yeah, that story literally is a perfect picture for everything that's going on. It gave me that sense of bravery of like, you know what, like it's what I'm seeing. Even if I'm this crazy, I'm gonna say it because like I think there's this whole battle with groupthink right now. But stories like that paint that forgiveness narrative so beautifully. And even what you said yesterday underneath the video in the comment section was so straight to the point in that we can't just walk into situations assuming the worst um, because then we're bringing in so much baggage and painting a whole situation in a way that we can't reverse later on. And why not assume the best? Like, what are we gonna lose from assuming, even just the average? Don't have to go to the best. Just assume the average and get prepared for a no. But
Just there's a difference between defining your boundaries
yeah,
and defining your identity.
yeah,
And like identity is, first of all, children shouldn't be told to do that yet. That takes years and years and years of experimentation and maturity and rational thought and all kinds of, and many of us are still doing it. It's a work in
yeah,
progress. I actually believe if you're not still a work in progress till you die, you did something wrong. So
yeah.
you got to we're always improving. So to tell a small child this is your identity, it's like you're building kind of artificial boundaries that are around things that you can't grow and develop from, whereas a
Mm-hmm.
boundary should be about what you will and will not tolerate
Mm-hmm.
in terms of treatment towards you.
Absolutely.
So if you say, instead of, you teach a child that certain kinds of behaviors towards you are okay and some are not, this is where we tell our kids, you don't have to let anyone touch you.
Yeah.
If somebody wants a hug, you can say no, it's okay. So like you can help them with physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, whatever. And when you
So good.
teach a child how important it is to figure those out, figure out what the ones that they want to have, and not just to have them, not just to set them and say what they are, but to be confident to articulate them in a polite and civil manner to other
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't, I prefer that you not touch me, or I'd prefer not, or I'd prefer you call me XYZ or whatever. And then what are the consequences for people who violate those boundaries?
Right.
Again, civilly, like someone violated your boundaries, you give a couple choices, like tell them and we can't be friends, or tell them and say, I really need an apology, or you move and remove yourself from the situation, whatever. This instead, it's almost like we're telling everyone to behave like battered spouses,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of like, you need to, you know, take these things. No, better yet, beat yourself because
Yeah.
you were awkward and said the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, defining your boundaries is really important. And amongst those are one of those is, who am I going to allow to live in my head rent free?
Yes.
There should be
Yeah.
a boundary on your emotional life. And when you take
So
on
good.
resentment and hate, you're literally allowing other people, total strangers you've never met, who might have been dead for 300 years, who knows? You're
Exactly.
allowing these people to take up residence rent free in your skull
Mm-hmm.
and affect your choices, affect your thoughts in ways that are corrosive to your happiness.
Absolutely.
You are now caring
Absolutely.
about things that don't really serve you well in any
Exactly.
respect. So that was the lesson that I learned, and it took way too long to learn it. I don't
Mm.
want any other children out there to even go as long as I did
Mm-hmm.
with the, this unnecessary baggage.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
it's not theirs. It's not theirs to carry. And I think it's cruel to burden small children with the sins of their grandparents, or
Right.
or even the suffering of their
Yeah.
grandparents or their parents.
Right.
Isn't it, don't you think, I mean, you don't have children, but if you imagine yourself in the, caring for a child,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't you think that one of the things you would want to be able to do is to shield them from the things that happen to you?
Right. Absolutely.
Like, you know, it seems kind of weird that you would want to be like, now, let me tell you the horrible crap that happened to me and why
Right.
you should feel bad about it. It's like, I mean,
Yeah.
I've told my children some of the things that occurred, but more from the perspective of, if you want to know why I take this or that or the other seriously, or if you're
Mm-hmm.
curious as to why I'm so passionate about you guys um, being able to pursue your own happiness,
Mm-hmm.
it's because this happened to me. And then I
Right.
even have to check myself. I have to remind myself that, I can only want that so much. They still have to
Yeah.
walk their path alone. They still have to live their
Exactly.
lives. I can't protect them from everything.
Yeah. That's, I mean, yeah, you nailed it on the head. I would want my future seed to be empowered with, like, from the inside out, and not necessarily have to take on so much baggage. And I do really believe that we need to keep talking about the race thing, because forgiveness does apply to race as well. I don't know where we got this idea that it just has to be these, you know, someone hit you and so you forgive them for that. It's like forgiveness does encompass race as well. You shouldn't be allowed to kind of take on that baggage where you go to therapy. It's like you heal from other traumas, but like you're not really forgiving,
Right.
anything that relates to race. It's like, okay, then you're carrying more of a weight. Because I'm black, I'm carrying more of a weight in life. I have more, like, stress hormones being out of, hormones being out of balance because of stress. I'm going through physical health issues because of that. Like, I don't think that's fair. And also to your point about like giving children, setting limits on children through this sort of, you know, I don't know use the word evil, but this like skewed education. There's this book by Carol Dweck, I believe, called Growth Mindset.
Yeah, I think
And
that's it.
it talks about, allowing people to believe that they can, grow no matter what level, no matter what like demographic they fall into, that they can grow and learn and do things. And this is like working against that, when you're like, oh, it has to depend on everyone's treatment towards you for you to succeed in life. It's just going to be this like incredible setback in like 10 years. And
You're
um,
dependent.
you're dependent, absolutely.
You're not
And
free.
yeah,
You'll never be free. So if
yeah,
the instant that you decide that somebody else in any way controls your happiness, you first of all, you've allowed it. You've
mhm,
put the shackles right on yourself. And I mean, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt that said that nobody can step on you without your consent, or nobody can
oh wow,
victimize you without your consent.
hmm,
And that is true. I mean, when we're talking about this kind of victimization, I mean, obviously people can physically victimize you, but we're not in that place. That's not what we're
hmm,
talking about with the race conversation right now.
hmm.
So I anyway, I just think I love the video about forgiveness. I really encourage you guys all to, subscribe to Kimmy's channel, watch that video. It really meant a lot. I also think all the videos that you have out there are fantastic. The one about the history of some of the
Hmm.
slurs, that's fascinating. So I just, I don't know. You've made me think a lot about all of these issues, and I really appreciate it. I appreciate your voice and that you came on here and decided to share. Yeah, I think I hear the echo again too. I don't know what's going on.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah, I don't know what's going on. But we were coming up on 2 hours anyway. So what is the final thing? I mean, you've said so many amazing things, but what would you like to leave the audience with in terms of, from your perspective as you? I mean, just I'm not going to label you. I mean, what from your perspective, what would you like people to start asking? What questions would you like people to ask before they accept narratives or
Wow,
perspectives?
that's good. Hmm. I would say I might not quite be able to answer that question of what people should ask. I would just say don't limit yourself. Like, don't limit your thought process if you think there's something wrong with like your child's education, and they're just look at the fruit. Like, you can know a tree by its fruit. You don't have to know everything about critical race theory. You don't have to know about Kimberly Crenshaw to know that something's wrong. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you just kind of have to speak up, and question things and use your voice. Um,
Don't
and
let people make you feel small, and
exactly,
that because you don't have a PhD or a best-selling book,
right.
that somehow they know more about what your children, what's good for your child than you do.
Exactly. All you can do is just look at, if your child is complaining, like, that's it. That's all the evidence you need to be like, okay, I need to look into this, or I need to say something. So I would say empower yourself with that, and don't feel like. Another thing that I've noticed is people think, okay, because I'm white and I get shut down a lot, like I shouldn't say anything. If you happen to be white, Asian, Pakistani, black, however you fall into like the skin color spectrum, you should always like use your voice. That empowers just maybe three more people, and that ends up
Yes.
having a ripple effect. So yeah, don't back down. That would be my main takeaway.
Yeah. People
Is it
will say things.
people
Just
will say
go
things, yeah,
into it knowing that, just go
right,
expect it, prepare for it, plan for it, know that they're going to say things. That does not mean they're right.
exactly, absolutely. And one more thing would be if you're wondering how to, um, make sure that you're still like this person who's not racist, and people are like saying, "Oh, you're racist, you're racist, you're racist." Just continue reading books about the history of Africa. I think something that could be leveraged is that a lot of people ignore African history, and they that in and of itself is like a root of racism. I would say just like educate yourself on what happens in Africa with colonialism, because that is sort of a secret advantage that you might have over other people who just kind of think existence is limited to America, North America. And you'll find a lot more answers about the whole race question in the history of Africa. So that's like my one special tip.
I love that. I love that. And I'm actually going to do that because I feel sort of ignorant. I probably know more than the average bear because my dad was a big reader about wars.
Yeah.
And so he would always come and talk about like the Boer War and different wars. So that's how I'm familiar with the Belgian Congo and the Belgian behavior and and the French and so forth. So
Yeah.
I know about that in the macro sense,
Yes.
but I haven't read the actual history. So now I have a renewed interest. Thank you.
Yes.
Um, well, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for coming on and for
Thank
talking to me for
you.
so long. And as I said, everyone tell all your friends, go subscribe to her channel, subscribe to her channel. Where can we see your art?
You can see my art at kimikatiti.com/art.
Okay.
I can type that to you really quickly.
Yeah. Tip it with me
And
and I'm going to create a little banner for it too.
awesome. Or you could just go to kimikatiti.com and
Okay. Yeah. Let me do that.
everything will be there.
Okay. And is it for sale from
I
there?
do have prints for sale from my online shop.
Okay.
But I don't have any original artwork for sale at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want people to know about you and I want them to follow your channel and I want them to be aware of all of this goodness here. So
Thank you
very,
so much.
very cool. Well, thank you
Thank
for
you for
coming on.
having me.
Yeah, this was great. So hopefully you can come back sometime and we
Absolutely.
can catch up again. And in the meantime, I hope you have a fabulous rest of your Saturday.
You too, and I really appreciate the chance to chat. You're a wealth of information. You should totally write a book because I've learned so much from you
I
today.
know I'm just a Reader's Digest of lots of different little books. I don't have anything original to add.
Oh, I think you do. I think you definitely do. So
Well, I
thank
don't
you
know.
so much.
Thank you. Have a
All
great
right.
one. Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.